Now, Donald Trump has announced tough new sanctions on Russia's two biggest oil companies as frustrations grow over the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. The president posted the sanctions list on social media and called on Russia to agree to an immediate ceasefire. Here is Donald Trump.
They're massive sanctions. It's sanctions on oil. The two biggest oil companies, among the biggest in the world, but they're Russian. They do a lot of oil. And hopefully it'll push... hopefully he'll become reasonable, and hopefully Zelensky will be reasonable too. You know, it takes two to tango, as they say, and we're going to find out. They hate each other. These two people hate each other. You know that better than anybody, and it makes it more difficult than it should be. This should be easier to do, but the level of hatred between Zelensky and Putin is very substantial.
Trump was also asked why he acted now, and he said, "I just felt like it was time. We waited a long time." Now, Trump has walked back his threat to use Tomahawk missiles, and he's tried to involve China by telling the media that Xi Jinping has the power to pressure Putin. Now, Esther, of course, negotiations over ending the war in Ukraine have stalled. Donald Trump put off a second planned summit with Putin in Budapest. So, Esther, I suppose these new sanctions are sending a signal that Donald Trump's patience with Putin is wearing thin and he's really trying to ramp up the pressure here.
Yeah, and I think a sign that he's really kind of getting fed up with all of this, whatever Donald Trump looking fed up means, is that he's also put sanctions on India. So 25% sanctions on India, because India has been known to buy cheap Russian oil and gas and then sell it to international markets, to European markets, for example, at a hiked rate. I assume his next target will probably be China, which he didn't actually sanction. But I'm sure if he's very serious about this, we'll probably sanction in a few weeks. Now, he's also said that he hopes that this doesn't have to last very long, which is quite strange. When you sanction a country, you don't really want to tell them that you only want it to last a few weeks. You want the pressure to bite. But clearly, he is quite sick of what he thinks is Russia's stubbornness about concessions they want in the Donetsk region and insistence on the sort of land trade and keeping basically most of Russian-speaking eastern Ukraine as sovereign Russian territory, at the very least a Russian satellite state. Trump has been kind of flip-flopping because on the one hand, he's been a few weeks ago, he promised Zelensky that he was going to entertain the idea of sending them Tomahawk missiles. On the other hand, he's now saying that, Ukraine has to basically concede to to Putin because they don't have a chance of winning this. And in all of this, the Europeans have just basically become the insurance policy for Ukraine. You've seen them ramping up a lot of their sort of military contributions and aid to Ukraine, which is basically their way of kind of securing their own borders. But clearly, Trump is showing that he is not afraid to put sanctions on not only Russia, but people that are benefiting from Russia's flooding the natural energy markets with cheap oil and gas.
Esther, I want to talk to you about Japan because Japan has appointed its first female Prime Minister, Sanae Takaichi. She's a former government minister, a TV host, and once a drummer in a heavy metal band, but she is conservative and is inspired by Margaret Thatcher. Now, Japan's new Prime Minister has made it clear that there is a zero tolerance for illegal immigration and will be sending out illegals.
私は外国人との穏やかなお互いに思いやりを持って生きられる付き合い方はどうすればできるんか、一遍ゼロベースで考えるつもりです。毎年毎年、私たちと文化や何もかもがあんまりにも違う人たちをまとめて入れていくということ、この政策は一旦考え直さなあきません。経済的な動機でやってきて難民を主張する人、きちんとお帰りをいただきます。また不法滞在の人たちにも厳格に法律を守っていただきます。
Esther, her first diplomatic test will come in a few weeks when she hosts President Donald Trump in Tokyo. And I do want your thoughts on Japan's new Prime Minister, but I also have to get your thoughts on the leftist media's reaction to this in meltdown that a conservative has become Japan's first female Prime Minister. This is the headline on an ABC News article. Sanae Takaichi becomes Japan's first female PM, but some say it is not a win for women. And of course, This article has been written by a man, ABC's North Asia correspondent James Oaten, and this article attacks her conservative values. It goes on to say that her staunch conservative values has promoted traditional family structures. She supports current laws that prohibit married couples from having different surnames. She also opposed laws that would allow a woman to become an emperor. And they have featured this so-called political expert from Sophia University, Tina Burrett, in this article, who said it's almost like she's popular despite her gender rather than because of it. Esther, imagine that. Imagine becoming popular or earning your spot despite your gender.
I know, it's almost incredible. It almost looks like equality, which these people, I'm sure not too long ago, were bleating on about. Look, it only looks like women in politics is progress if they have the right kind of politics. And Takaichi is quite an interesting character. I mean, she's kind of centered herself recently in her politics. But if you look at the particularly on immigration that she's speaking of, in a country of about 124 million, you only have an estimate about just over 70,000 documented illegal immigrants, most of whom come from Vietnam and China and Thailand. But it's the frankness with which she talks about it, not making it a racial issue, not saying, like many people like to paint her as a far right fascist or anything, just saying if you break the law or if your way of life is not compatible with ours, you will not be allowed to stay. She's even talking about, tackling the asylum system, which Japan's asylum system is far from abused. They have a less than 1% acceptance rate. But it's clarity of saying if this doesn't serve Japanese society, we will not accept it. Even if, and I'm sure when they get to cracking down on this illegal immigration, they end up rounding up about 100 people a year, if that. Even if that's all that matters, it's the principle of being able to have these discussions openly and say proudly, this is something that must benefit our society, or we will not tolerate it. That I think is blowing people's minds, and the fact that she's a woman as well, the first female prime minister saying this, is making these people's minds glitch. And I think in the West, I wish we could have these sorts of frank conversations. What is Western identity? What kind of immigration benefits our society? What should we tolerate? What should we accept? These sorts of things. And the fact that she's saying it so frankly, I mean, she was a huge fan of Margaret Thatcher. She actually met her before she died. And she was mentored by Shinzo Abe, who is the most successful prime minister in Japan's history. I mean, about a third of Japanese prime ministers only serve less than a year. So I think she's probably going to be quite successful in that regard. But, Western countries, take note.
Absolutely. Well, someone who's not messing around when it comes to immigration is Reform UK leader Nigel Farage. And the latest polling by YouGov shows that if an election was being held today, Reform would win. The poll has Reform at 26%, Labor at 20% and Tories at 17%. So a very clear lead. But this, of course, comes as Britain's immigration policy is failing. I mean, there are countless examples. Just today, Esther, it's been revealed that an Iranian man who was sent back to France under this one-in, one-out scheme has returned to the UK on a small boat, Esther. It's just showing that this one-in, one-out policy isn't working.
Well, you know what's even more hilarious? The government is saying that this scheme has successfully sent back 45 individuals, although it's no longer a success if we know that they can come back. Meanwhile, 11,000 people have crossed the channel in the last few months. You really couldn't make it up. It would be funny if it wasn't so depressing. And you have to wonder why Reform is leading in the polls. And this is a lead that I suspect is probably going to calcify. We're a few years away from an election, and when they're this far out, you have local elections going on in May next year, which Reform is probably going to completely destroy the Labour Party, which has never lost Wales, for example, since the devolved parliament was established. So these are just no-brainers. Why is Reform leading? Because in as much as Labour would basically like to point out that Reform voters are racist or fascist or whatever, they're not handling the issues that many voters feel quite strongly about, and then they have no one else to blame but themselves. For them to even say that they have made a success of this by sending just about 3 or 4 dozen people back when you're having tens of thousands of people crossing the borders. Kemi Badenoch said, so do we get 2 people sent back to France because this guy has come in twice? It's laughable. It's a joke now.
Yeah, as you say, it'd be funny if it wasn't so depressing. The numbers are absolutely outrageous.